Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Mok-yeon. With U.S. President Donald Trump set to arrive in Beijing for a high-stakes summit with Chinese President Xi Jinping, global attention is now focused on whether the two leaders can ease growing tensions across multiple fronts. The talks are expected to cover not only trade and semiconductors, but also the situation in the Middle East, Taiwan, the South China Sea, and even North Korea. And for South Korea, the stakes are especially high as Seoul now reviews possible participation in a U.S.-led maritime security initiative near the Strait of Hormuz, while also pushing to finalize a roadmap for the transfer of wartime operational control. So what should we watch most closely from this summit, and what could it mean for the Korean Peninsula and regional security going forward? For answers to this, we are joined in the studio by Mok-yeon, Senior Research Fellow at the Institute for National Security Strategy. A very big welcome, Dr. Go.
Good to be with you.
And also joining us online is Ambassador Joseph Detrani, the former Special Envoy of the U.S. for the six-party talks. Good to see you.
Nice seeing you.
So let's start a discussion with Dr. Go. Like I've said, National Security Advisor Ri Sung-rak said that South Korea is reviewing participation for this America-led maritime security initiative related to the Strait of Hormuz. So realistically, what kind of role do you think Seoul can take from here?
Well, I think really the ball is on the U.S. side. I think there's been so many changes taking place in Washington regarding U.S. Policy towards Iran. So I think many allies of the United States are uncertain about what kind of role the United States government expects from them. So I think South Korea is very much in that situation, especially so because President Trump has called out South Korea several times for its need to contribute to the stability of stabilizing the Strait of Hormuz, because South Korea imports a lot of oil from the Middle East, therefore has a stake in it. But at the same time, though, the U.S. government has been very clear what kind of role South Korea should be performing for its most important ally, the United States. So I think what National Security Advisor Ri Sung-rak has said today is essentially a commitment, but not so much of a firm commitment, but contingent commitment upon the changes that could take place in the near future. I think so long as there's a lack of clarity on the situation on the Persian Gulf, I think South Korea will be essentially hedging its bets and not to be enmeshed too much in the Korean conflict, because we don't know which way this conflict is going to turn out to be. So I think this is essentially a way for South Korea to essentially respond to all these requests coming from Washington, but at the same time, it doesn't mean that South Korea is going to have a substantial role right away.
Right, so it's really about balancing alliance pressure and regional risks as well. Now, Advisor Ri also said that Seoul is now pushing to finalize Opcon transition roadmap within this year, while pursuing what he called a full validation of the process. Ambassador, do you think the discussion is now entering a more concrete phase? And what do you believe Washington sees as key conditions for this?
No, I think it is reaching a conclusion here. This has been discussed for the last decade or two. So yeah, and I think the Republic of Korea, I think the military-wise, the conditions, it's condition-based. This transition is condition-based, and with a strong emphasis on military capabilities. And I think the Republic of Korea has those capabilities. So I would think within a year or two, we could see Opcon transferred to the Republic of Korea. So yeah, I think it's on track, and I think the process has been meaningful. The conditions-based aspects to the transition has been very significant and appropriate. And I think given the environment, and that's a separate question, the environment that you know, with the South China Sea, with the Taiwan Straits and so forth, but that's also part of the equation. So no, I think the Republic of Korea, South Korea, is prepared to move on Opcon, and we'll see this within a year or two.
So it's now the discussion is entering a more concrete phase, it seems. Now let's turn to the upcoming U.S. China summit, Dr. Go. So President Trump is on his way to Beijing alongside top business leaders, while also signaling that Iran and regional security will also be part of discussions. What do you think both sides are hoping to gain from this summit?
I think the expectation has been lowered quite a bit since the initial plan to hold a summit initially in April last month, but it's been delayed because of the war in Iran. But nonetheless, I think there's some expectation that the President Trump and President Xi, by coming together, can reach some sort of extend the truce they have reached after President Trump came into office last year. If you remember, last year, President Trump essentially came out with a lot of strengths, pressuring China, especially on the economic front. But then when China actually responded forcefully by, for instance, by implementing very strong export control measures on the rare earth, then the President Trump's tariff policy that was squarely targeted on China, in fact, took a back step. So the global economy has sustained a very uneasy truce between Beijing and Washington since then. So initially, the global economy, especially the economy and the business sector, expected the United States and China come to some sort of a more lasting understanding on many fronts, including not just in the economic front, but also in the national security area as well. But I think for now, the overall consensus is that there will be pretty much the two leaders will be focused on more tangible outcomes that are not unlikely to lead to a lasting solution, but nonetheless is going to signal that the two sides are working together for a positive outcome. So the media is talking about so-called the 3Bs and 3Ts. So 3Bs it will be the expectation from the United States on China. So 3B stands for beef, beans, as in soybeans, as well as Boeings, so essentially airplanes. So I think President Trump is expecting China to announce major purchases in these three categories of goods. So in exchange, China would like United States to deliver so-called 3Ts. So here T stands for tariffs, technology, and Taiwan. So especially, I think President Xi wants the United States, through President Trump, to make concessions, or actually, like relax the restrictions on the export of AI chips, especially the ones built by NVIDIA. So I think there's been a lot of pressure on China, or because of shortages in the AI chips. So I think President Xi would want to take advantage of this summit to relax some of the export control measures that are currently in place on China. Also, I think it's a long shot, though. I think President Xi would like President Trump to express something more concrete in his opposition to Taiwan's independence. So there are some discussions that President Xi would like President Trump to express a very clear opposition to Taiwanese independence, which might not happen, but nonetheless, I think President Xi will try. So I think these are the points that we should be watching for tomorrow's summit.
Thank you for giving us a very clear picture of those points. Now, alongside these three Bs and three Ts, Ambassador Dechani, you've recently wrote that the world wants to see whether the U.S. and China can still cooperate to address a global crisis together at a time of growing geopolitical tensions, of course. Do you think this summit can realistically send that kind of message?
Well, I hope the summit does send this message. I think the global community is exhausted, given the wars that we've seen, the war in Ukraine, the war in Gaza, certainly the war now with Iran, but also world hunger and the conflicts throughout the world. So yes, I think there's an element of exhaustion here where they would like to see these two superpowers come together and say, we can cooperate. We can cooperate on global pandemics. We can cooperate on nuclear proliferation, on counterterrorism, counter-narcotics. These are things that we need to be working together with the People's Republic of China. And look, in the 80s and the 90s, we did cooperate. We worked very, very closely with China on many of these issues. So we should re-engage on all these issues and make it clear to the world, given all the conflict in the world, and indeed on the whole question of food scarcity, to ensure that we are working to resolve these issues, to make life easier for the people in the global community. And this is the time to be doing it. Hopefully, this is one of the deliverables from this summit, a very important summit. But hopefully, this deliverable will be presented to the international community.
Right, definitely, and many will be watching to see if this rivalry and cooperation can coexist this time. Now, this upcoming summit appears likely to cover everything from trade and semiconductors to Iran and broader security issues, as Dr. Go has mentioned. Ambassador, do you see this more as an effort to stabilize relations or a high-stakes negotiations between strategic rivals?
I think we need to certainly stabilize relations. And that's the key. I mean, we will be competitors, and there's nothing wrong with being competitors. The consumers, the people benefit when we compete like this. So when there's a comparative advantage in economic terms, the consumer only will benefit. But stabilize relations in regards to the Taiwan issue, stabilize relations in regard to the South China Sea, and to ensure that we are working together. Now, was mentioned North Korea. That's another issue there, where China has always been very helpful in regards to North Korea with the six-party talks, with the Foreign Minister Wang Yi hosting those talks going back to the early 2000s. So hopefully we can show the world that we have stabilized our relationship here, and the element of tariffs and trade, the trade disadvantages and so forth. These are things that, whether we have a new trade commission, whether we put mechanisms in place, we re-energize the diplomatic side of the ledger to ensure that we have a lot of this, and we have a process to deconflict. Whenever we see a potential for conflict, we can deconflict that. And our respective leaders can pick up the phone and communicate immediately to ensure that there is stability and there is tranquility.
So speaking of managing tensions, Dr. Go, Taiwan is also emerging as a very key issue for dialogue between the two. So if the U.S. and China try to ease tensions over Taiwan or the South China Sea, what kind of impact do you think it would have on regional security?
Oh, indeed, if the two sides can agree on Taiwan, yeah, definitely it's going to lead to positive impacts on the regional security. But I think we have to understand that it's not the first time that China is insisting on getting some sort of a change in U.S. policy on Taiwan. So it's been very persistent position by Beijing regarding their relationship with the United States. But then I think this time is a little bit different, because I think the Chinese expectation is probably heightened by the fact that President Trump's position regarding China has changed quite a bit since last year. It's only been a year, but President Trump came in. You have to remember that President Trump came into office with a very strong position on China as well as Taiwan. But now it seems like President Trump is diverging from his support base by being a little bit more lax or lenient on the Chinese position. So I think the Chinese are probably trying to drive more of a wedge between Washington and Taiwan through this summit. I think there also, I mentioned before, obtaining a different expression on the U.S. Lack of support for Taiwan's independence. As I said, probably the Chinese want President Trump to express or say essentially that he is opposed to Taiwan's independence. It's going to be seen as a major achievement by the Chinese. So I think, and also they probably expect that they can obtain this through a quid pro quo with President Trump. So by offering major economic concessions, maybe that they expect President Trump to express essentially side with China when it comes to Taiwan. So we can see it both ways, either way. So if the President Trump sides with the Chinese position regarding Taiwan by becoming more, having a stronger like a position regarding U.S. opposition to Taiwan's independence, it's going to have downstream impact, which are not entirely positive. So I think if President Trump is perceived to be siding with China, I think that's going to lead to further erosion on the U.S. credibility in the region. So I think this is something that I think a lot of watchers in Washington are following very closely, because I think with a single word that could completely undermine the U.S. credibility with the allies in East Asia in particular. So I think this is another point that we should be watching out for during tomorrow's summit.
Right, so we will have to be all ears regarding that. Now, what about North Korea, Dr. Go? Of course, we always ask you that. Yeah. Do you think this summit, when North Korea comes in top of the agenda, do you think it could be a turning point for the Korean Peninsula?
Well, same with Taiwan. I think it's another. We all circle back to the North Korean issue, especially with President Trump, because President Trump has expressed his personal interest in engaging North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. So, and also President Lee Jae-myung of South Korea has said several times that he wants to be the pacemaker to President Trump's peacemaker role. So I think we can say that all the signs are aligned right now for a potential breakthrough in the U.S.-North Korean dialogue. So I think this is the reason why there's a heightened expectation about a potential for the beginning of some sort of a dialogue taking place between Washington and Pyongyang through this opportunity of the President Trump's another visit by President Trump to the region. But I think the chance of that happening is probably not that high at the moment, because first of all, President Trump has a lot of things on his plate right now. Also, you mentioned before, all the agenda items that we have discussed already between the bilateral agenda items between Beijing and Washington is already a handful. So something that cannot be settled in one summit. So if you have to add to it the North Korean issue, which is very complicated already, I think it's going to be distracting in a way. I don't think President Xi's priority is restarting dialogue between Washington and Pyongyang at the moment. As I said before, I think his priority is to elicit President Trump's some sort of surprising statement about Taiwan. So I think all the Chinese energy is going to be focused on that issue, rather than brokering some sort of dialogue between Kim Jong-un and Trump.
So North Korea would less likely be on the agenda?
Exactly. I think the priority of the a North Korean issue taking a lot of bandwidth in this summit is probably not very realistic.
All right. Now let's still delve into North Korea's recent moves as well, Dr. Go. So North Korea recently redefined inter-Korean ties as two separate states, and then also announced plans to deploy new artillery systems that are able to target Seoul. How could we read into their latest moves?
So we have to read North Korean actions as like two steps forward, one step back. The reason is because one of the major changes or manifestation of North Koreans' policy towards South Korea, or the lack of thereof, is that North Korea essentially didn't meet our expectation when it came to North Korea's newly promulgated constitution. I think going into this year, I think there was a heightened expectation that North Korea could officialize its so-called two hostile state doctrine in its core constitution, and also name South Korea as a major enemy. But that didn't happen. Not just that, North Korea also used this occasion of promulgating new constitution to outline these new borders, national borders. But then, in fact, North Korea passed the opportunity to essentially settle a new maritime border in the Yellow Sea, which is a major friction point between Seoul and Pyongyang. So incredibly enough, North Korea has passed over opportunities to create tension and also to irritate South Korea. So I think some watchers in South Korea are considering this as a sign that North Korea is trying to essentially reach some sort of stability or understanding with Seoul, which is a major positive message for the President Lee Jae-myung, because he's been very focused on restarting engagement with North Korea. He's been very invested in it. So I think this kind of subtle changes from North Korea is going to be seen as a major positive step by the South.
Now, finally, there are also reports that Iran has deployed North Korean-style mini-submarines near the Strait of Hormuz. Ambassador, should we now see military cooperation between North Korea and Iran as a more serious security concern?
Well, North Korea has always been supportive of Iran, and they've, over the years, certainly when you look at the missile technology transfers from North Korea to Iran, they've been significant. I mean, basically, Iran's missile capabilities depended heavily on North Korea. So yes, I think we're seeing this in the current conflict with Iran, the war with Iran. Yeah, the transfers of vessels, and to include what you just mentioned, looking at the possibility of these mini submarines being transferred from North Korea. Yes, this is a long-term relationship between the DPRK and the Islamic Republic of Iran. And I think this is ongoing now in spades. And this is one of the talking points, I would imagine, that if President Donald Trump does eventually meet with Kim Jong-un, and I think that's likely, and I think North Korea wants to see that engagement, wants to see an eventual normalization of relations between the United States and North Korea. I think that will be one of the issues that President Donald Trump will mention, is North Korea's support to Iran.
So we will have to keep close tabs on that because it would become a broader security concern moving forward. But as for now, we'll have to conclude our discussion right here. Thank you so much for your insights tonight, Ambassador Detrani.
Thank you.
And of course, Dr. Go, we really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame tonight. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Till then, stay informed and engaged.